Hey guys, Mr. Sonnenberg here. This is for Science 24 students studying Unit 3 Disease Defense. This is topic 1, and today we're going to be talking about pathogens. So I just have a little humor with regards to pathogens. We just have a little clip about the human cold. I'll give you a little time to read through that. Maybe it's funny, maybe it's not. I don't know. It's up to you. You can decide. But take a look at it. We're going to be talking about things like the common cold. We're going to talk about viruses, bacteria, fungi, protists, and such, and how pathogens are contracted. And we'll talk a little bit about the incident in Canada that occurred in 2002-2003 with regards to the SARS virus. So first thing we need to understand is what is a pathogen. Now, pathogen, they're disease-causing microbes. So most pathogens are microscopic, which means they're extremely small, and we would have to look at them through a microscope to actually view them. And then there's 4 types that we're really going to discuss, and so we're going to actually go through these. We'll talk about the bacteria, we'll talk about viruses, fungi, and protists. Okay, so if we take a look over at this chart, we'll see that pathogen routes. We can go in 2 different directions. We can go here with the viruses, and then we can also go over here with bacteria, and then we move down to fungi, mushrooms and such, protozoa, parasites, and then protein. Okay, now various pathogens. Now, like I said, these are disease-causing microbes. So if we contract a pathogen, then we can contract a potential disease, and this will actually lead into communicable and non-communicable diseases. And we'll talk about the spread of these particular diseases in contracting a pathogen or one of these microbes. Okay, so these microbes are going to cause disease, and that is what a pathogen is. Okay. So moving on, we're actually going to break it down and we're going to talk about those 4 pathogens discussed there. So the first one we're going to discuss are bacteria. So basically bacteria are on your skin, they're in our mouth, they're in the air we breathe, and they're in the food we eat. So these bacteria are everywhere. But bacteria, we have to note that they can be both helpful and they can also be harmful. So basically what a bacteria is, it's a single-celled organism, and it's so small that we would have to look at it with a microscope. So then again, saying that pathogens are microscopic, that's what I'm referring to. But they can be, like I said, they can be both helpful and harmful. So what happens with bacteria, though, is they can reproduce very quickly. So if we get a cut on our hand, or no, not necessarily, but if we come in contact with bacteria and maybe it's a bad pathogen and it's harmful, it's going to reproduce really quickly at a high rate, and it's going to form colonies. And if the conditions are good, and we'll talk about the following environments and conditions, then it's going to spread quite quickly. So if we take a look over here at bacteria like the following environments. So sorry, that arrow is awful, my bad. But they like 3 things. Temperature. So most of them like warm temperature. So if we freeze or we refrigerate things, that's going to slow bacteria. So if you think of an example, maybe I would not leave my food out on the counter if I want to cook a steak or chicken breast or something like that. I'm not just going to leave it on the counter all day. I'm going to put it in either in the freezer or put it in the refrigerator, because those temperatures are going to slow bacterial growth or bacterial growth, and that's going to help me to stay safe. And that also, basically at that point, what that's going to do is it's also going to slow the spread of communicable diseases, which we'll talk about in later screencasts. But if it's too hot, extreme temperature, then bacteria also die. So they like temperature. They're going to reproduce at a higher rate in high temperature. So we like to freeze and we like to refrigerate. And that's why our food can preserve if we put it in the refrigerator, is because we're stopping the spread of that bacterial growth, and we're going to slow the bacterial growth as well. Now, number 2, the second thing we're going to talk about right here is moisture. Moisture, so bacteria need water. So without water, they can't reproduce. So if we're in an area where the temperature is warm and there's moisture, then we're going to find that we're going to have bacteria growing at a rapid rate and reproducing very quickly. And then the third and last point is food. So bacteria thrive on sugar, protein, or fats. Now, if we're not taking proper procedures to ensure that bacteria is not growing, it's going to grow really quickly, especially on food. So, we eat food, we have bacteria on our skin, like I said, in our mouth. We breathe these bacteria in. Why aren't we always sick? And we're going to talk about those things as we keep moving through the screencast. Now, the second thing we need to discuss is viruses. Now, these are another type of pathogen. So, like bacteria, viruses can be found anywhere there are cells to infect. So our body is made up of trillions of cells, so we are going to find viruses within us. But what's going to happen is they're also very small. So they're actually smaller. These viruses are actually smaller than bacteria. And they're going to, just like bacteria, they're going to multiply quickly, and what they'll do is they'll invade our body cells. Okay? And how do they reproduce? Well, they just reproduce by taking over the cells in our body. So what they do is they use part of the body cell, and that's usually used to reproduce cells. And they basically take over that cell, the part that reproduces, they use it, and then they grow extremely fast, and they multiply. And that multiplication of cells is going to invade our cells in our body. And like I said, we're made up of trillions of cells, so you can see how these viruses can spread. So I just have a little example at the bottom. I'm just going to read it to you. It says the HIV virus that caused AIDS looks like a bomb. So it is a virus that flows through the bloodstream of infected individuals. An infected person may contaminate the blood of any uninfected person in one of several ways. So there's various ways that these viruses can infect people. So we're talking HIV virus and then what causes AIDS. So if it invades a person through having sexual intercourse, maybe sharing needles, receiving a transfusion of infected blood, so maybe we need blood, we receive that blood that was possibly donated from another donor, and then that blood is actually infected with HIV, and then that can actually, then the virus can grow from there and multiply within our bodies. And then the last is moving through the birth canal of an infected mother. So if a mother is infected through the birthing process, then the child will be infected as well. So those are viruses. Okay, so viruses were smaller than bacteria, but they're both pathogens. The third that we're going to discuss are protists. And protists are single-celled organisms that share some characteristics with both animals and plants. Okay, so there's two protists that are common. Okay, the amoeba and also the paramecium. Okay, so the amoeba can be picked up from contaminated water or food. So that's where we're going to find these protists. Okay, so what they actually are going to cause is they can cause serious disease such as things like malaria, African sleeping sickness. Okay, and then if we take malaria, well, how's it spread? How is this pathogen spread? Well, malaria is actually spread by mosquitoes, and those little pests that we have to deal with all the time. Yeah, well, they can spread things like malaria, and so. But we think about conditions where the spreading of these pathogens can be passed on through various organisms as communicable diseases. Like I said, a lot of them are going to need temperature, moisture, and then they can be passed through food. Then the fourth and last that we'll discuss briefly is the fungi, and those are going to include a few things here. They're going to include things such as molds, yeasts, and mushrooms. Okay, so these fungi, they cannot make their own food by photosynthesis. So some fungi, we would say, are they're parasites. And so basically they can live on a host organism. And remember, parasites in a symbiotic relationship, there's parasitism. So they're going to live basically, majority as a parasite, they're going to benefit while the other's going to be harmed. So fungi such as mushrooms taste great on pizza or salads. And we know, and I think my favorite type of pizza is pepperoni, mushroom, and bacon. I don't know what yours is, but I just love it. Dip it in a little ranch, maybe a little bit of hot sauce on it, but I don't know. I can say, hey, I just want a little fungi on my pizza. No, I wouldn't say that. I'd just say mushrooms, I think. But others cause disease. So two examples of these fungi are athlete's foot and then ringworm. So those are basically two fungi that live on the body. If you just take a look over here, we've got a case of athlete's foot. Then here we have a case of ringworm, and then on the body, these are fungi that can actually grow. So these are pathogens that can be contracted. And remember the 4 types: bacteria, viruses, protists, and then fungi. So this is the 4th of which we could contract. Now, if we talk about how pathogens are contracted, well, they can enter the body in a variety of ways. And I just have 2 sections here that we can discuss. So one, we can get a break in the skin. Okay, so all the skin it's a great barrier to pathogens if it's breached. So for example, if we have a cut or a burn or a needle penetrates it, that pathogen can get in. Okay, so that's why it's so serious sometimes. Say I had a friend that works in a dental office and actually had a used needle actually penetrate her glove and her skin, and so it was quite the process before she could actually get in the back and work again. And she wasn't allowed to donate blood and such because there was potential that a pathogen of some sort had entered her body, so she had to make sure she had the all clear, and it was quite the process actually. But it penetrated the skin, so there was a break in the skin, and that pathogen could have broke that barrier and then made its way into her body. So the second I would talk about is via open canals in the body. So we could say things like the mouth, the nose, ears, eyes, possibly the vagina, these open cavities in the body, and we can actually contract pathogens that way. Now, the incident with SARS, okay, a respiratory disease and such, it actually originated in, I believe it was South China in 2002 and 2003. What happened was basically we had an outbreak, and this was a disease, and we've been talking a little bit about this as a case study, but this was the disease that was transmitted. It was from person-to-person contact, so direct mucous membrane, so that would be contact, so that's your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. So saliva, runny nose, it can get in your eyes, and then it would infect people, and it was actually quite aggressive. We actually had in Canada, we had 251 cases of SARS. There was 44 deaths, okay, and then deaths due to the other causes, there was none, but the percentage of fatalities or deaths by case was 18%. So it was quite the outbreak, and so what we're going to actually do is we look at different pandemics and epidemics around the world, and we're going to actually create, or you're going to have to later in the unit, you have to explore your own, and we're going to have to do a project on it, and you're going to have to identify, mode of transmission and such. What was the pathogen? How was it contracted and such? And then was it communicable or non-communicable? And we'll go through and all those different various points. But anyways, this is pathogens. So remember, we had bacteria, we had viruses, we had protists, and we had fungi. Okay, 4 various pathogens. And if a pathogen enters our body and we contract a pathogen and it's transmitted to us, then there's ways we have to get rid of it, but there's different ways we can, communicable ways that we can get that communicable disease. So anyways, this is a little bit about pathogens. Hopefully it helps. Remember, the bonus to these screencasts is you can play, pause, rewind. There will be a series of questions on your unit template following this screencast that you'll have to answer that discuss what the information and the key points and the rocks and the meat and potatoes from this screencast, the things that we really want you to know. If you have questions, bring them to me. And remember, when you watch a screencast, you don't have to watch the whole thing at once. You can press pause, take a break, stretch, and all that. And if you have the opportunity to talk to your parents and you have a little sniffle or you're not feeling good, you can say, oh, I think I've contracted a communicable disease. I think a pathogen has entered my system, and it's causing me to be ill, and they'll go, what the heck are you talking about? And you say, oh, I'm just talking about science, and maybe it's a virus or a bacteria, and you can act all cool, and your parents will be like, you're crazy. You'd be like, no, I'm intelligent, and I know this stuff. Anyways, that'll probably make your parents happy, or else they'll think you're weird. But anyways, in our class, we really want to use the proper terminology and such so that we really understand it. But pathogens, okay, hopefully this has helped. Good luck on your Google form, and if you have any questions, bring them to class. Great, thank you. Bye.